I wanted to first thank Antonio Subraz for pointing this issue out in his video, Globaling Accidentally Destroys the Globe. For this video, I wanted to quickly cover the Nicobine transmitters and how these transmitters prove the globe model faults. You'll remember in my recent video on the ionosphere hoax that naysayers told Guglielmo Marconi that he could not transmit radio waves across the Atlantic Ocean due to the curvature of the Earth. In fact, if the globe model was correct, these naysayers were mathematically right, as Guglielmo's antenna should have been approximately 527 miles below the horizon at that distance. However, Marconi proved them wrong. Like Marconi, we run into a similar issue with respect to the World War II German Nicobine transmitters. I'll be referring to this Wikipedia article. The Nicobine system was developed to enable German bombers to accurately bomb England at night or in poor weather. How it roughly worked was that one radio signal would detail the path of the bomber. The second radio signal from a different location would then tell the bomber when it was over its target. The beam from a single transmitter would guide the bombers towards the target, but could not tell them when they were over it. To add this ranging feature, a second transmitter, similar to the first, was set up so its beam crossed the guidance beam at the point where the bombs should be dropped. The aerials could be rotated to make the beams from the two transmitters cross over the target. The bombers would fly into the beam of one and ride this beam until they started hearing the tones from the other on a second receiver. When the steady on-course sound was heard from the second beam, they dropped their bombs. The Nicobine system was brilliant. But are you starting to see the globe problem here? Efforts in Britain to block the Nicobine system took some time to get started. Well, in other words, lives were lost because of this delay. British intelligence at the Air Ministry, led by R.V. Jones, became aware of the system when the Royal Aircraft Establishment analyzed a downed German bomber's Lorentz system and observed it was far more sensitive than required for a mere landing aid. Secretly recorded transcripts from German prisoner of war pilots indicated this may have been a bomb-aiming aid. Winston Churchill had also been given ultra-intelligence from decrypted Enigma messages that mentioned bombing beams. When Jones mentioned the possibility of bombing beams to Churchill, he ordered further investigation. The British codenamed the system Headache. Many in the Air Ministry did not believe that the system was in use. Frederick Lindemann, leading scientific advisor to the government, argued that any such system would not be able to follow the curvature of the Earth, although T.S. Eckersley of the Marconi Company has said it could. Eckersley's assertion was eventually demonstrated after Churchill ordered a flight to try to detect the beams. The RAF lacked equipment capable of detecting 30 to 33 megahertz Lorentz signals, so they purchased an American Helicopters S-27 amateur radio receiver from a shop in Lisle Street, London. The receiver was fitted into an Avro Anson and operated by a member of the Y service. The flight was nearly canceled when Eckersley withdrew his assertion that the beams could bend around the Earth. Jones saved the flight by pointing out that Churchill himself had ordered it, and he would make sure that the Prime Minister would get to know who canceled it. The crew were not told any specifics and were simply ordered to search for radio signals around 30 megahertz having Lorentz characteristics, and if they found any, to determine their bearing. The flight took off and eventually flew into the beam from Cleve on 31.5 megahertz. It subsequently located the crossbeam from Stolberg. Its origin was unknown prior to this flight. The radio operator and navigator were able to plot the path of the beams and discovered that they intersected above the Rolls-Royce engine factory at Derby, at that time the only factory producing the Merlin engine. It was subsequently realized that the argument over whether the beams would bend around the Earth was entirely academic, as the transmitters were more or less in line of sight to high-altitude bombers. Let me point that out again. It was subsequently realized that the argument over whether the beams would bend around the Earth was entirely academic, as the transmitters were more or less in line of sight to high-altitude bombers. Is Wikipedia right? Were the transmitters in line of sight to the high-altitude bombers. Line of sight is necessary because Knickebein was a line-of-sight system. So, where were these Knickebein transmitters? Here's a small map. Here's a video clip describing the curvature debate between physicist R.V. Jones and Churchill's leading scientific advisor, Frederick Lindemann.
There is a Knickebein station at Cleves. Somehow, a transmission from it has been confirmed at this position over in England, and the simplest interpretation was that a navigational aircraft had been out, located where the beam was positioned on this particular occasion.
Dr. Jones took the message to Professor Lindemann, his old tutor and now scientific advisor to Winston Churchill, and tried to persuade him of the serious threat posed by the Knickebein beams. But Lindemann was not convinced, pointing out that at the high frequencies necessary for an accurate beam, the curvature of the Earth would prevent its being directed against targets in Britain. Nevertheless, Dr. Jones was convinced that his theory was correct, that the German bombers were using their Lorenz blind landing sets to fly the long-range beams. And if this was so, then the threat was very grave indeed, because all German bombers carried this equipment as standard. Therefore, all of them were potential beam flyers. But Lindemann was not convinced, pointing out that at the high frequencies necessary for an accurate beam, the curvature of the Earth would prevent its being directed against targets in Britain.
Was Lindemann right about the globe math? Lindemann was absolutely right about the globe math. The first transmitter was set up on Stolberg Hill, located near Denmark. The hill has an elevation of 142 feet. Let's say there was a 200-foot Knickebein tower on top of the hill, which looks something like this, giving a maximum transmission height of 342 feet. The target, the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby, was at an elevation of 180 feet. The distance between Derby and Stolberg Hill is 443 miles. That gives us a target hidden height of 117,504 feet. The second tower was in Cleve. Cleve has an elevation of 39 feet, and add a 200-foot tower to get us to a maximum transmission height of 239 feet. Cleve was 331 miles away from Derby, England. That means Derby should have been 64,844 feet below the horizon. There is simply no way that there should have been any line of sight between the towers and the German bombers, which only flew at 19,200 feet. There would only be a line of sight on the flat Earth model. Looks like Wikipedia got it very wrong. In summary, the line of sight Knickebein system is a very strong proof of the flat Earth and demonstrates the foolishness of those who believe in the imaginary curvature of the Earth.